Hello everyone, welcome to Big Sloppy MMA. Get ready for the biggest and sloppiest MMA takes of your life. Now, in the welterweight division right now, we have a big problem. And that's that this guy has just shown up and absolutely destroyed the champion. Now this leaves us with an even better problem to have, which is we've got so many amazing contenders at welterweight. Really, we need to have a look at how they all stack up. You know, we've got people like Michael Morales, Shavkat, Ian Gary, a lot of really great guys. But just like we've been asking for all of Islam's career and all of any dominant champion's career, how will they stack up to these new challenges? And that's what we're going to look at today, guys. We're going to be looking at how the welterweight contenders stack up against Islam Makhachev, how I think they do, the strengths and weaknesses they've displayed in some of their fights. So without wasting any more time, let's have a look at the first contender. First off, we have Michael Morales. He's 19-0, undefeated giant, disgusting speed, never seen the same room as Spider-Man. His main strengths are his speed, his size, his calf kicks. Let's get on to his fights. So, first off, we'll be having a look at his fight versus Gilbert Burns. Now, in this fight, we saw a dominant display of his striking. Because look at him, he is massive. He's absolutely massive. He goes out there and he dwarfed Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns looked tiny. Admittedly, Gilbert Burns, like Islam, was a former lightweight. But in that fight, it just didn't seem like Michael Morales had to worry at all about Gilbert Burns throwing. It seemed like the shots just weren't even an issue. Something we did see, though, is we did see him get taken down. We did see him give up his back. And we did see him separate the hands and fight the clinch well. This is a good sign for him. That being said, though, one of my big concerns for him is facing a complete grappler like Islam. You know, we're seeing him struggle against a 39-year-old Burns getting taken down. And another thing that is very present in his fights, this was present in his fight versus Jake Matthews. This was present in his fight versus even Sean Brady. Until that kind of midway through the second round when he realizes his opponent can do nothing to him, which might not be the case with Islam. He moves forward and back a lot. He doesn't have a lot of lateral movement. He likes a pivot hook with his lead hand. But apart from that, he's not out here moving side to side like the likes of an Ian Gary. You know, which is fine because a lot of the time he doesn't need to. He's so massive. He can literally just go schmack, schmack, schmack. And they're done. You know, it's not a complex thing for him. He's got devastating calf kicks, which he can do on both sides. The open and closed sides calf kick, which is a rare quality in MMA right now, is kind of being able to do that step-up calf kick to the open side to someone in the opposite stance. Because obviously when you're in the opposite stance, the body kick is on the open side. But being able to do that lead step-up calf kick to the open to the open side of the leg is brilliant. It's absolutely amazing. Somebody does very well. But my main worry is, so I was looking at his fight versus Jake Matthews, a fight that went to decision, because I thought, well, we need more game tape on him. And so what I noticed very quickly is, I think there was one or two times he ended up into that front headlock position. We saw Islam Makhachev control JDM with that very efficiently. Now, he had the right instincts, which was to frame on the hip, post out, really good, but he was getting controlled there, you know, and it kind of seems like in that position, it's a vulnerable position to be put in. And he's one to very quickly give up his back, scramble. You know, it doesn't seem like he's doing this with the threat of submission in mind. He's got very good physical strength, but we need to see how he comes out against someone with like a complete grappling arsenal. This is something you'll see me talk a lot about with Islam. It's hard to say, how does Islam go out and beat this person? You know, you can't compare it to Bilal. You can't compare it to an Usman, because unlike these guys, Islam doesn't just use single leg, double legs. You know, he uses a lot of upper body throws. He uses a lot of inside trips. He uses a lot of judo. It's kind of similar to Marab and Umar's takedown game. You know, it's a very varied takedown game that is really impressive. And this is why I think Islam does so much better than a lot of other grappler matchups in the UFC. We could sit here and argue for ages. Does Daniel Cormier beat this person? Does John Jones beat this person? You know, and oftentimes, even though Daniel Cormier had the higher accolades in wrestling, what allowed kind of John Jones in those matches and in his career to do that well with a high level of grappling was the upper body throws mixed in with the singles, mixed in with the doubles. You know, famously he got that lifting double at the end of the round against Rampage Jackson. And I think the same thing really rings true here for Islam on a whole nother level. Islam's game is so complete. It doesn't seem like he struggles in any of these grappling aspects, and this is something we're going to be looking at a lot in this video, is seeing who can say they've got none of the weaknesses to all of these different offenses that Islam can throw out. Because JDM did so brilliant against Bilal. That JDM performance was amazing against Bilal. We'll get onto that shortly. But it makes me think, you know, when we see Moraes end up in this front headlock position, when we see him getting taken down by Burns, these are going to be the things that he has to overcome. You know, Islam, I would argue, is a better striker technically than Gilbert Burns. I would argue his counter-striking is much better. I would argue when Morales has to throw, he has to worry about Islam coming back at him. You know, it's these things we've got to look at in this matchup. I personally think Islam wins this fight. I think Morales probably gives him a harder fight than some of the other people on this list, but we'll get into that. There'll be a ranking at the end, basically talking about the chance I think they've got of beating them. Morales does have a good chance relative to the others, purely because of that size and power, and also he has got a judo background. I don't think it's a high-level one in MMA. I don't think it's one that you can sit and go, oh, he's, you know, judo background, he'll be fine against all the trips, all the upper body throws that Islam has. But it's one you need to look at, and one you need to say, okay, well, he understands these throws. Okay, so we're going to go on to a matchup that I think is a bit more cut and dry. We're going to talk about Carlos Prates. Now, obviously, Carlos Prates is an amazing striker, amazing Muay Thai style. And if we talk in the welterweight history of strikers, he is probably the best striker when it comes to that kind of accuracy of power and precision that separates people from consciousness, like a Prime McGregor, a bit like a Taporia as well. He's not hitting people with TKOs, he's disconnecting them from consciousness. But he does have clear holes, you know. He struggled against Ian Gary. You know, he didn't really get taken down by Gary. But it occupied him, and it made him turn into kind of an inactive fighter. You know, he threw very little strikes in that fight. And, you know, the high kick, which is also something Islam does very, very well, probably not as well as Ian Gary, but it's something he does well, occupies the hands. And it's all about kind of occupying that kind of charge-up zone for Prates. You know, Prates has got to kind of build up like a little meter to kind of get into his flow state and really unleash his arsenal. And Gary did a really good job of disrupting that. And I just think that it's pretty obvious to everyone that I think Islam will be able to do it. I don't think Prates enters many questions in the prevents takedowns. Leon controlled him in round one. I really like Prates, and I think he's an amazing fighter. But I think that it's just a poor style matchup for him. His keys to victory, of course, are that rear knee. If you can hit Islam with the knee off his strong-sided leg, it can give Islam some real problems if going for a takedown. But that's such a small margin. It's a pretty cut-and-dry matchup. Islam wins. All right, guys. Now let's go on to the next contender, who I think this one might be the closest between him and Islam. But right now he's out on injury, so we don't know. That's Shavkat Rakhmonov. So Shavkat Rakhmonov is a big Kazakhstani, well, one of them, welterweight, who his specialty seems to be, one is grappling and two is clinch work. Now, this comes with two very interesting caveats. His highest profile fight against Ian Gary, the number one contender currently, it was actually his boxing that got the work done. It was his ability to kind of pick out shots over the guard, which is something he did really well when he was on the regional scene. He made very good use of looping shots around the guard. He does this really good double jab into kind of that lead hook. And then when they circle the other way, he likes to throw that overhand. And also, apart from the Ian Gary fight, he's not a big takedown guy. Now, people hate me saying this, but he isn't someone with elite takedowns. You know, there are examples of him not finishing certain takedowns. There was this really famous example that Jack Slack brought up. I'll try and find it, but he's not someone who goes out there, finishes takedowns, apart from that fourth round versus Gary, where he blast doubled him. Now, the interesting thing is it's very clear that he struggles heavily against leg kicks. That's something that Ian Gary used very much to deter him and forced him to make those big shots. And now, against an Ian Gary, who's not going to shoot a single, who's not going to shoot a double against someone of Shavkat's quality, that's a really easy kind of out. You know, he's throwing a leg kick, bam, overhand, bam, overhand. you know? It's a very easy way to go about the leg kicks. But one of Islam's greatest strengths currently seems to be his ability to strike at range, you know? Those long crosses he throws as a counter, the leg kicks he threw against JDM when JDM was standing quite spread out. Shavkat isn't going to stand that spread out, but it's worth noting. It is worth noting that. So generally, having a look at Shavkat's arsenal and Islam's arsenal, it looks like this would be a fight that Shavkat would need to win in the Muay Thai. He'd need to stand a lot more square to avoid the leg kicks. He'd need to go in with a double jab. He'd need to use that kind of loaded up cross into that like little small tapping body jab. I think he finished him with that in the regional scene. But he would need to make very good use of that. The knees on the break, that's something he needs to look for. So he didn't do this as much against Ian Gary. Ian Gary was actually getting better of him in the clinch work when it comes to the striking. Obviously, Ian Gary was in position. But that being said, Shavkat needs to make really good use of these knees off the break. He needs to disincentivize Islam clinching him. He needs to disincentivize Islam grabbing him. Because as I'm sure Shavkat is a great wrestler, or great grappler, I think it's very clear that his best path to victory is in the striking. And that becomes a very interesting dilemma. But overall, I actually think he's got a decent chance if the injury hasn't affected him too much. I do think Islam wins, but I think it's a very hard debate right now. We've seen that Shavkat's tough. We've seen that he's strong. We've seen that he can defend those submissions. I know Ian Gary is clinically allergic to finishing a rear naked. But that being said, he does do a very good job of defending submissions. He had the 2-on-1 versus Gary. He was always fighting for it. But it's just a question of how much that injury affects him. That injury might absolutely ruin him, or it might make him even better. We don't know yet, and that's what's going to be amazing to see. All right, guys, let's get on to the last contender. So, let's get on to Ian the Future Gary. All right, so Ian Gary, right, as much as people want to give him slack, yeah, he's actually looking like a decent challenge for Islam. I don't think he'll challenge him the same way Shavkat will. I just don't think Ian can nullify the threat the way that Shavkat can. If Shavkat can stay off the grappling, Shavkat has still got finishing danger. Ian Gary doesn't really, and that's the main issue. But the first thing is, we've just seen him go to a 29-28 with Bilal. Someone who JDM dominantly pieced up, and then obviously we saw what happened at JDM versus Islam. And Ian Gary has got such amazing balance, right? I honestly don't think you're going to get this man with like a balance, like with a takedown that threatens balance, like a single leg where you're not kicking the leg out, And he's so tall, it's so hard to hike that leg up. But we saw Shavkat, who's not really got the best takedowns, blast double him. We saw Bilal hold him up against the cage repeatedly, We saw Shavkat hold him up against the cage, It seems like his biggest weakness seems to be his physical strength, He's a small welterweight in terms of actual weight and mass. In terms of, length, he's huge. But in terms of his actual weight, I think he walks around like 181. JDM walks around like 200-ish, Darren Till, eight years ago, walked around 190, and he was a massive welterweight for that time. And they've only gotten bigger. Michael Morales, he's massive, weight-wise as well. I just can't see Ian Gary, right, after getting out-muscled by Shavkat, after getting out-muscled by Bilal, even though he still won that fight because, but Bilal's Bilal, if he... but Bilal's taking people to split decisions. Ian Gary's taking the unanimous decisions, I think that's going to be his big weakness going into this. That being said, I think that Islam will have the hardest time out of anyone getting Ian down. I think that he'll have a very hard time getting Ian down with traditional takedowns. I think what will happen is, generally, Ian will give up double unders against the cage. He'll lower his level. And what he does, he did this against Bilal, I think, in the third round. He almost lowered his level, like, not pulling guard, but almost like he was sitting down. It happened versus Shavkat as well. I think it was the third or the fifth round. Against Shavkat, he basically sat down, and Shavkat kind of just went over him. But that being said, Ian Gary doesn't exactly have a massive finishing threat. I think that on the feet, he's the best mover out of the bunch that we've talked about. He's got amazing lateral movements. The rest of these guys I think has been poorly lacking, which is something I think you need to have success against Islam. If you're just moving back, that octagon becomes very small, and Islam can very easily impose his cage wrestling. Those upper body throws, those trips, all of it,
you know. But I think Ian Gary's probably got the best way of avoiding Islam's strengths. But I don't think he'll be very good at imposing his own, because he does get taken, you know, he did get taken down by Shavkat, he did get outmuscled by Bilal, and also he's hittable. You know, Shavkat hit him, you know, Prates ended the fight, hit him, you know, he is hittable, and I just think looking at it, you know, I think that we could be in for another Islam versus JDM, because I could see Ian Gary using his jiu-jitsu, which is very strong in terms of submission defense, avoiding the submission but just getting held down for 25 minutes, and we could see him come out of it with like a mental victory type attitude, like he does with Shavkat. Ian Gary is the weirdest fighter, right, when it comes to this. He lost 3-2 in my opinion, 4-1 on the scorecards, I thought it was, to Shavkat, right, and he came out and been like, his knee's gone, he's so much less of a man now after he beat me, where are his knees now? You know, acting like Shavkat's knees aren't injured every camp. You know, so I think we could see Ian Gary come out of it being like, Islam couldn't finish me. He took me down, but he couldn't get me. I'm the next generation of welterweights, not getting finished by these guys. What do you mean he held me down for 27 minutes in a 25-minute fight? What do you mean? He didn't finish me. I'm unscathed. Look at his face. He was cut. What do you mean his coach applied Vaseline the wrong way? He was cut. Like, I think that's what we're going to see. It's a really difficult situation to judge what will happen in that fight. But I do think Islam comes out with a win. I just think generally Ian is very good at like nullifying people's strengths. But you can kind of come out of that fight talking about kind of his strengths apart from his fight IQ and game planning. You know, he's got those amazing kind of lead side kicks. He does it to the head very well. Off the same side jab, he did that very well in Cage Warriors. But yeah. Okay, guys, now what we're going to do is we're going to rank them in how I feel they stack up against Islam. And I know I haven't spoken very in-depth about the fighters in this video, and I'll be doing in-depth videos on more fighters to come. That being said, currently, I think the hardest challenge to Islam Makhachev would in fact be Shavkat Rakhmonov. Now I know generally because Ian Gary has been more active, there's been this wave of recency bias saying, oh, well, you know, Ian Gary, you know, he just beat Bilal, JDM beat Bilal, and we saw how that went. I think Shavkat brings a threat of his own, whereas I think Ian more so tries to neutralize the threat of his opponent. I don't think you really look at Ian and think, oh, his striking, you know, is devastating, it's dangerous, even though he did outstrike Bilal, had some very impressive moments, very creative striking, that spinning back fist. It wasn't really at any point where you thought Ian could finish this. It was more so you thought, Bilal's not going to win this decision. That being said, Shavkat does bring in unique danger. He has a submission game. He has a strong Muay Thai game. His boxing defense is very lacking. His general defense is really lacking. But in general, it seems like Shavkat's going to be the most dangerous. Number 2, Ian. I just think he's on that level above the others we discussed, Prates and Morales. I get those two confused. I think he's on that level above where I don't see Islam's strength just immediately smashing through him. I think that it's like a back and forth fight. I think it'd be easier for Islam than the Poirier fight, but I think it might be a tiny bit harder than the JDM fight. But I don't know, because Islam's new at welterweight, and he's the new kid on the block, basically. He's got a lot of quality that we've yet to see at that welterweight division. And Ian isn't very strong, but I think that he goes here just because I'm not very confident in the other two below. Number 3, I think this is pretty obvious ranking. I think Michael Morales is number 3. I think that he hasn't got the ability to kind of point fight like Ian does to avoid the takedown. I think he swings very heavy. I think we'd see him come out in the same stance he did against Brady. I think we'd see him come in with his hands more down, him ready to punch like a comic jackhammer, you know. I think that his calf kicks would be a very big story in this fight. I think that he's one of the few fighters who Islam would face, apart from Poirier, who doesn't tend to actually use them very much, apart from the McGregor fights, who will offensively use those calf kicks. And I think that'll be a big story. But when you look at how he throws, and when you look at the positions he put himself in against lesser fighters, I think it's hard to say that Islam doesn't maul him. I think that he overthrows and Islam can get a takedown off that. And I also think in the clinch, he ducks his head down and he doesn't have a strong spinal connection.
And I think that can lead to him kind of getting control. Like we saw Islam against JDM, put him in that front headlock and just control him there. And I think that even though Moraes is a lot stronger, I think that he doesn't have the same level of jiu-jitsu coaching, even though he's a judoka himself. I don't think he has the same level of jiu-jitsu coaching to kind of help himself out of those positions that lead into submissions. You know, against a lesser fighter, that front headlock on JDM would have turned into a submission. But because of, obviously, the brilliance of JDM, we didn't get to see that. But I do think Moraes ends up getting taken down and quite possibly subbed. He gave up the back pretty easy against Gilbert Burns. And also he got taken down again. Yeah, I already spoke about this, but yeah, I just think Moraes, I think Moraes gets beat, but I think that he has that puncher's chance, and I think that his power isn't the X factor here, it's his speed, it's his dynamicism, but I think that he'll very quickly get backed up and turned into a corpse. And finally, obviously, my favourite out of all these four guys, Carlos Prates. Really amazing fighter. I think Prates beats Morales. And I think Prates, has a good chance against Ian Gary in a rematch. But that being said, I think against Islam, he's just completely outgunned in terms of the skill set that Islam brings and the skill set he brings. I think if you were to say a striking match from anyone between 155 and 185, I think Carlos Prates, that's like a solid shout. I think he has a chance in that conversation, even against the likes of, an Adesanya, because he's a bit out of prime now. I think it would be an interesting fight, but against Islam, I don't see it being an interesting fight. I think the same holes that, displayed itself in the Ian fight would show up. And I think that generally his output would go down quite a lot. And I think that he would end up losing a decision 50-45. I could see him getting subbed, but again, all these guys at 170, all these guys I've spoken about, even though it feels like I haven't been complimentary enough to them for how good they are all amazing. And the last thing I want you guys to think is, going away from this video, that, I think Islam is completely untouchable at 170. He looks like that right now, but I do think these guys are so quality that we will be seeing an interesting time in the division for the next couple of years, if everyone's active, if everyone's healthy. Obviously, the big red flag with Shavkat is the injury. I think he needs to come back and fight maybe an Edwards, maybe a Brady. Just to show, not so much to deserve the shot, because he's got that win over Gary, but more so just to kind of affirm that he hasn't lost that step, lost that killer instinct, because he's injured every camp. And at what point do you look at it and say, all right, well, he was out in the first round beforehand. He dominated these guys in the first round, Magny, Geoff Neal, Wonder Boy. At what point do we turn around and look, well, 5-round war is a bit different. I don't think he got hurt very much in that Gary fight apart from his legs, but the recovery is completely different, man. And I'm looking forward to seeing him back. But yeah, I think the fight to make next is obviously Islam versus Gary. I think a dark horse in this conversation is Usman. I think Usman could come in, take out Prates, take out Morales, and I can't get that name right for the life of me. But I think he could be a dark horse, and I think he could come up because he has got the skill set. If we were going to make a fighter to contest Islam, I think that Usman would kind of have that skill set minus a bit more jiu-jitsu prowess. But yeah, this is the final tier list, and I thank you guys for watching. Please make sure you like and subscribe, because obviously this is a new channel. We want the MMA tapes to get bigger, sloppier, and better every single day. I'm going to aim to post once every other day, every day if they get good engagement. Please, like and subscribe and all that. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely day, alright?